Hi, I'm Karen, and this is part 25 of a course called Intro to English Grammar at the University of Utah. We're going to talk today about restrictive and non-restrictive relative clauses. So we've just covered coordination and coordinating two clauses together, and then we covered subordination and subordinating clauses and what that looks like. And now we need to talk about restrictive and non-restrictive relative clauses. So we've actually talked about relative clauses a couple of times, but now we're going to talk about this specifically. Okay, we're going to talk about what that means, restrictive versus non-restrictive, and then also about what we do for punctuation. Okay, so this is something that we've seen before if you've watched the other videos. So we've learned about subordinate clauses before, as we've learned about relative clauses. So in our class we learned about those quite a while ago as we talked about relative pronouns. So we can have something like the burglar who stole my wallet also took my pocket change. Who stole my wallet is a relative clause with the relative pronoun who. It can't stand on its own. It's a subordinate clause, so it's a dependent clause with the subordinator who, which is also a relative pronoun. And so we have to have both clauses together in order for the sentence to make sense. Okay, so we've talked about this before. But as we've talked about these, here's what we have not talked about, okay? We have not yet talked about restrictive and non-restrictive behavior, okay? We've not talked about the prescriptive rules for how we punctuate those two different things, and whether a clause is restrictive or non-restrictive depends on the meaning. So as we've talked about these before, we've left out this huge area of clauses about non-restrictive and restrictive that we haven't talked about before. Okay, so relative clauses are made up of a relative word, a subject, and a verb, and the relative word or the relative pronoun is the subordinator. Okay, what do they modify? Well, they always modify nouns. Okay, so here's what we've been avoiding. Okay, we've been avoiding non-restrictive relative clauses, but we're going to talk about those now today to talk about the two things. Now, it's really important for you to understand that the information in the non-restrictive one, it's based on how important that information is to the rest of the sentence. So in this case, we're actually going to rely on the meaning of different things and kind of some knowledge outside of the grammar in order to know whether it's restrictive or non-restrictive. Okay? In restrictive clauses, the information given is necessary to modify the noun. So the man who fixed my car promised a low price. So who fixed my car is necessary to help us understand who the man is. Okay, if we don't have that information, then we don't know who the man is or why a man promised you a low price, right? So we need that information to narrow down who the noun phrase is that we're talking about. Okay? In non-restrictive clauses, they don't give us any new information that identifies the noun. Instead, they're giving us a description of that noun, so they're still modifying the noun, but it's not new information. Okay, for example, Winston Churchill, who is a very respected political leader, was known for his sharp wit. So when I say Winston Churchill, most of you, hopefully all of you, probably all of you, narrow down in your mind to one individual that we're all thinking of as the same individual. You're not thinking of some guy named Winston Churchill down the street, or wondering if I'm confusing Winston Churchill with someone else. You're imagining the same Winston Churchill I'm talking about. The Winston Churchill that was the Prime Minister of England back in the early 1900s. Okay? So in this example, we don't need the relative clause to know who we're talking about. So if I leave that out and just say Winston Churchill was known for his sharp wit, we have the same meaning in the sentence. Adding the information about him, who is a very respected political leader, doesn't actually tell us more about him because we'd already narrowed in on what Winston Churchill or what noun we were talking about. So one test to find out whether or not the clause is relative or non-restrictive is to take it out of the sentence. So we removed that one about Winston Churchill, seemed to make the same, have the same meaning. So that one gives us an idea that it is non-restrictive, right? So a restrictive relative clause cannot be removed without losing a lot of meaning. So here are some examples. Ben Kingsley, who played Gandhi in that movie, is a wonderful actor. If I take out the who played Gandhi in that movie, Ben Kingsley is a wonderful actor, you're likely thinking of the same Ben Kingsley I am, and it doesn't really narrow it down who we're talking about by having that clause in there. Okay, a restrictive clause, I saw the doctor who treated me last year. If I take out the relative clause, I saw the doctor, then often the speaker's left, or the listener's left wondering, what doctor are we talking about? So it's a necessary one. So there's no grammatical difference as we look at the grammar of the sentence. There's no grammatical difference. It's all based on the meaning. Therefore, we can write the same relative clause, one restrictive and one non-restrictive, and have a different meaning. Okay, let's take a look. So here I have a couple of pictures with basically the same grammar. The doctor who is on the left really cares about his patients, and the doctor who is on the left really cares about his patients. So in the first picture where we have a group of doctors, we need the information who is on the left to narrow it down to which doctor we're talking about. Where when we have a picture that just has a woman and a doctor, who is on the left is really superfluous information. And we don't care that he's on the left. We already know which doctor we're talking about when we see that picture. So here are some examples, and I want you to think about what is the difference in meaning. Okay, so we have first a restrictive and a non-restrictive sentence, okay, about my friends. And then we have a restrictive and a non-restrictive sentence about my friend who plays basketball. Okay. So let's look at the first one. So the first group, we have two different types of meaning. Okay. So in the restrictive meaning, it means that I have many friends and some of my friends are from Canada. Okay. I live in the United States, so that would make sense that some of my friends are from Canada, but probably not all of my friends. So when I say my friends who are from Canada, I'm narrowing down to a specific group of friends. Okay, the non-restrictive version, my friends who are from Canada, okay, though that means that all of my friends are from Canada. So I don't need to give you the information that my friends are from Canada because in fact I live in Canada, I've never been outside of Canada, and all my friends are from Canada. Why would I have any other friends? Okay. So the non-restrictive and the restrictive, the punctuation actually gives us some information about the meaning of the sentence. Okay, in the second one, in the second grouping, we have my friend who is very tall is good at basketball, and my friend who is tall is very good at basketball. Okay, in the first one, I have many friends and one of my friends is tall. And in the second one, I've been maybe talking about one friend for a long time, or I only have one friend. And that person is tall, okay? So it's not necessary for me to specify that he's tall because it's the only friend that I have, okay? So they can use different relative words as well, okay? We learned before that we could use that for almost all relative clauses. And that's true except for non-restrictive clauses. So non-restrictive clauses require a WH word as the relative word. They don't seem to work the same using the word that. Okay, how do we punctuate these? Well, when it's restrictive, we don't do anything special. We just end the sentence how we usually would, usually with a period. And the non-restrictive, we set apart that clause by commas. Okay, so the commas actually give us some indication about the meaning of the sentence there. Okay, the car that I want to buy has a cassette player. The non-restrictive, my current car, which I bought used, needs major repairs. So my current car, I just have one car that I'm talking about, and the information about buying it used is not information I need in order to determine which car I'm talking about, because I only have one current car. Okay. Partly made known by the fact that it's car and not cars. Okay. The car that I want to buy has a cassette player. If I just left out that clause and said the car I want to buy, if I left out that clause and said the car has a cassette player, you would kind of wonder why I'm bringing up information about a car with a cassette player, right? The fact that I want to buy it gives us information about that car specifically and why I'm bringing it up. Okay. So we set off the relative clauses that are non-restrictive with commas. Okay, so here's some practice. So here are some sentences. You can pause it if you want for a minute to put in your commas, or you can keep going. And I'm going to show you the answers. Okay. So when we look at the first one, my sister Mary, comma, who lives in Florida, is coming for a visit. Well, I probably don't have more than one sister named Mary. So the only time when who lives in Florida in this sentence would be restrictive, would be if I actually had two sisters named Mary, and I needed to specify that it's the Mary who lives in Florida versus the Mary who lives in Texas. Okay, the girl who had the most points won the contest. Here we are giving information to narrow down which girl we're talking about, so no commas. Okay, Vancouver, which is in British Columbia, is a lovely city. This depends on what your assumption is when I say Vancouver, right? So some of you, when I say Vancouver, might assume that I'm talking about the Vancouver in British Columbia, in which case, if that's the only Vancouver to you, then it's set apart by commas because I'm not narrowing it down. But if when I say Vancouver, you think that it could be the Seattle Vancouver, or this is Vancouver just north of Seattle, the Washington Vancouver, or the British Columbia Vancouver, then in that case, that information is giving us information about which noun phrase we're talking about. Okay, Ulysses S. Grant, probably not more than one Ulysses S. Grant in your mind, and so when we give more information about him, that's set apart by commas. Okay, the people to whom we gave tickets, when we give the tickets, it's specifying which people, that it's not all people in the whole world, but just the ones we gave tickets to. Okay, the thing that bothers me most is the humidity. So again, it's narrowing down what it is that bothers me the most. Okay, so that's kind of an overview of restrictive and non-restrictive, and you want to make sure that you are punctuating them appropriately, or you may convey the wrong meaning.